choice. These are the higher-ups.
Well, he's a higher up too. I mean, you know.
Not like this, you know. Oh, come on, Frank. If they can whack a president, they can whack a president of a union. You know it, and I know it.
In January of 1961, the curtain rose on the Kennedy era, casting the spotlight on America's unofficial royal family, a dynasty intertwined with the very fabric of Wall Street, prohibition sagas, and ties that stretched back to the epoch of Franklin D. Roosevelt. The patriarch, Joseph P. Kennedy, a figure of immense intrigue, once graced the halls of power as the British ambassador under Roosevelt's reign. His associations read like a who is who of the elite, mingling with British aristocrats whose sympathies for Nazi Germany were whispered in hushed tones. Yet these connections, like shadows, would cast a long, haunting presence over the family's legacy. The stage was set for a dramatic shift in the American psyche, with the explosive event at Pearl Harbor. A cataclysm that would shatter the nation's isolationist stance. America, somewhat reluctantly, found itself catapulted into the maelstrom of World War II. But behind the scenes, FDR harbored no immediate desires to wage war against the Axis powers. With the specter of Nazi sympathies looming within his own borders, he bided his time, awaiting a comprehensive report on the devastation at Pearl Harbor. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another titan of power, Hitler, was also poised on the edge of decision. Misreading the American response, he preemptively declared war on the United States, leaving FDR no recourse but to respond in kind, thrusting America into all-out conflict against Nazi Germany and its allies, including Japan. FDR's tenure would end within the hallowed walls of the White House, setting the stage for Harry S. Truman. Truman, stepping into the breach, would mark the end of the war not with conventional warfare, but with a decision that would forever alter the course of history: the authorization of 2 nuclear strikes. This act not only concluded World War II, but also ignited the flames of a new kind of conflict, a Cold War that simmered through the 50s and 60s. As the British Empire crumbled, leaving behind a shadow of its former glory, the Soviet Union emerged, boasting of territories seized and influence extended deep into Germany, cleaving the nation into East and West. In this new world order, Britain, now a diminished empire, sought to reinvent itself, turning its colonial legacy into a burgeoning financial empire, engaging with the shadowy realms of organized crime to fuel investments from America. Amid this era of transformation, Winston Churchill, ever the strategist, penned letters to Truman, seeking American investment to bolster Britain's waning fortunes. This alliance, forged in the crucible of post-war recovery, was not just a partnership, but a pledge to elevate America to the zenith of global dominance. During Prohibition, a pivotal era marked by the ban on alcohol in the United States, organized crime groups, spanning Italian, Irish, Cuban, and other backgrounds, began to coalesce, seizing the opportunity to establish themselves as power brokers not only in the political arena and labor unions but also on the streets. This era catapulted these groups into becoming one of the wealthiest corporations in America at the time, with business empires that spanned globally. From the days of Lucky Luciano, these organizations were known for infiltrating various sectors of the government, extending their influence far beyond mere bootlegging operations. Their control was not limited to urban territories. They played a crucial role in the operation and safety of the docks, especially significant during World War II. Their collaboration with naval intelligence to safeguard these strategic locations forged new alliances between organized crime and military sectors. Simultaneously, monumental projects like the Manhattan Project were underway, demanding extensive transportation and construction networks capable of moving goods across the country in complete secrecy. This period highlighted the Mafia's instrumental role in maintaining these clandestine operations. Meyer Lansky, a notable figure in organized crime, recognized early on the critical importance of transportation infrastructure, particularly trucks and vehicles, for the future. At a time when the roads were not yet designed for heavy truck traffic, Lansky envisioned and subsequently established a thriving transportation network. This network, adept at moving goods illicitly across the country without attracting attention, became a cornerstone of the Mafia's operations. Through over a decade of meticulous planning, the Mafia became an integral part of America's transportation infrastructure, significantly contributing to the war effort. The influence of organized crime did not wane with the end of World War II. Throughout the Vietnam War and other Pacific conflicts, figures like Albert Anastasia dispatched some of their most capable men to assist in the loading and unloading of goods. Their involvement was critical in establishing ports, hubs, and docks, facilitating the smooth transfer of military supplies. This enduring relationship between organized crime and military operations underscores the complex and sometimes covert collaborations that have shaped historical events. The power of organized crime reached an unparalleled intensity during the 50s. It was a time when criminal syndicates not only expanded their traditional domains of unions and gambling, but also ventured into new territories across South America, Europe, and beyond. Cities like Havana, London, and others in Switzerland and France became nodes in a sprawling empire. By the 60s, these organizations were pioneering the heroin market, with the French Corsican Mafia emerging as one of the most formidable forces. Known for their ruthlessness, they were reputed to eliminate threats with extreme prejudice, including high-profile figures and even French presidents. Their operations were shrouded in secrecy, making them one of the most enigmatic criminal organizations of their time. Speaking out against them could mean a death sentence, as loyalty was enforced with an iron fist, and betrayal was met with brutal retribution. These Corsican gangsters were not just criminals. They played a strategic role in the Cold War era, aligning with the CIA to combat communism, particularly in regions under French colonial influence. Their activities intertwined organized crime with political and financial corruption, extending their influence into unions, the banking sector, and the nascent entertainment industry. Entertainment, in turn, became a vehicle for propaganda, echoing a strategy once employed by Nazi Germany. American elites, eager to harness this potent tool, recruited Nazi propaganda experts to shape public opinion, an effort aimed at molding societal beliefs to their advantage. The narrative of the Mafia's influence does not stop at crime. It extends into the very fabric of society, entangling politicians, judges, industrialists, and celebrities. This complex web of interactions revealed by the Kennedy administration illustrates not just the reach, but the integrated role of organized crime within the power structures of the time. The Mafia, in essence, was not a mere outlier but a central player in the dynamics of power, influencing everything from policy to public consciousness. Understanding the depth of their involvement requires unraveling the intricate connections between these criminal organizations and the elite, revealing a stark portrayal of the symbiosis between lawful governance and the underworld. The influence of organized crime on American society was profound, extending its tendrils into every corner of the establishment. From police officers on the beat to high-ranking commissioners, the grip of organized crime was inescapable, with only a few remote areas remaining untouched. Despite this overwhelming presence, J. Edgar Hoover, the formidable director of the FBI, staunchly denied the existence of organized crime on American soil. Even when Time magazine presented evidence to the FBI as early as 1949, Hoover remained obstinate in his denial, a stance he maintained until his death. Rumors abounded in Washington and New York about Frank Costello's close ties with Hoover, suggesting that organized crime had even infiltrated the highest echelons of government. Allegations surfaced about alliances between organized crime, naval intelligence, and high-profile figures like Tom Dewey to secure the release of Lucky Luciano from prison. The shadows of organized crime extended over the presidencies of Harry S. Truman, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and even the Mafia president Richard Nixon. Robert F. Kennedy, despite tarnishing his reputation during the McCarthy hearings with his fervent anti-communism, saw his fortunes change with the McLennan hearings of 1958 and 1959. There, he confronted powerful figures in organized crime, setting the stage for his later efforts against corruption as he entered the White House. Kennedy's administration marked a turning point. He delved into the underworld that had flourished since Prohibition, unraveling the complex web of corruption, power, and violence that characterized organized crime. Kennedy's investigations revealed the interconnectedness of various criminal groups and their influence over key industries, particularly the Teamsters Union, led by figures like Jimmy Hoffa. He exposed the dark underbelly of America, where crime syndicates, operating like a shadowy secret society, wielded power that rivaled that of the government itself. These revelations led to one of the largest heroin busts in history, linking the French Corsican Mafia to the Gambino crime family, and shedding light on the intricate relationships between the Chicago outfit, the Jewish Mafia, and the Italian Mafia. The Kennedy era peeled back the curtain on the symbiotic relationship between organized crime and powerful union leaders, revealing a world where crime and legitimate power were indistinguishably entwined. Testimonies emerged of a vast criminal network operating with impunity, its actions concealed by bribes and the manipulation of legal and political institutions. This was a world where J. Edgar Hoover could dine publicly with mob lawyers like Irving Davidson, and where mob leaders boasted of their influence over political figures, including the very election of Kennedy himself. As Kennedy's understanding deepened, so did his resolve to target this secret society. He recognized that the fight against organized crime was not just a battle against individual criminals, but against a pervasive and deeply entrenched power structure that had corrupted the very foundation of American society. In his pursuit, Kennedy became the nemesis of this shadowy world, aiming to dismantle the secret society that had ruled over America's unions, industries, and, by extension, its people. This was a bold move, targeting the heart of organized crime, challenging its long-standing dominion, and seeking to restore integrity to the halls of power. In the twilight of Luciano's dominion over Italy, the stage was set for a seismic shift in the underworld. As the curtain fell on one era, titans of the criminal world like Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino, along with an ensemble of notorious mobsters, moved swiftly to orchestrate their ascension to power. Their gambit for supremacy, however, required a delicate dance of diplomacy, especially in the aftermath of a chilling act that shook the underworld to its core, the brazen murder of Albert Anastasia. This pivotal event prevented Genovese and Gambino from immediately seizing the reins of the Costello and Anastasia crime families. Yet, destiny would soon call upon them at the clandestine conclave known as the Appalachian Meeting. As if drawn from the depths of a shadowy realm, this gathering would see the mob's most formidable figures emerge from their hidden sanctuaries, converging within the secluded embrace of the woods. Swathed in the anonymity provided by sleek black vehicles, these power brokers were about to rewrite the annals of organized crime. Representing every corner of America, from the bustling streets of New York to the sun-kissed shores of California, each criminal overlord lent their presence to this summit. Here, amidst the whispers of the trees, they were poised to usher in a new era, to decree the dawn of an epoch that would reshape the face of the underworld. However, Fat had other plans. The Appalachian Meeting, intended to be a cornerstone for the future of organized crime, unraveled spectacularly, exposing the Mafia's vast network in one fell swoop. A single rookie police officer, armed with little more than a hunch, managed to unmask this gathering, stunning the world and embarrassing top-tier agencies, including J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. This revelation shattered the illusion of invincibility that these mobsters had cultivated. Their once unassailable reputations were now under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. For decades, these men had operated in the shadows, their influence permeating every crevice of society. From the roaring 20s through the turbulent 30s, they had engineered a reign of terror, birthing the infamous Murder Incorporated, yet remained untouched by the long arm of the law. But the Appalachian debacle peeled back the veil, revealing the sprawling empire of organized crime that had flourished on American soil, hidden in plain sight for over 80 years. In the aftermath, the shockwaves of Appalachian would reverberate through the annals of history, culminating in 1963 with Joe Valachi's explosive testimony. This act of betrayal confirmed the existence of the Italian Mafia to the world, marking a pivotal moment in the battle against organized crime. Thus, what began as a gathering to crown a new king of the underworld ended as a spectacle that would forever alter the landscape of American crime. As the dawn of 1961 broke and John F. Kennedy was sworn into office, a tumultuous chapter began to unfurl with the precision of a meticulously planned drama. Within the very same breath of fresh beginnings, Robert F. Kennedy, the president's brother, ascended to the powerful position of Attorney General of the United States. This move sent ripples of fear cascading down the spines of the underworld's most formidable figures, who had clung to the hope that the Kennedy administration would turn a blind eye to their clandestine operations. They harbored the belief, perhaps naively, that appointing Robert was merely a gesture to appease him, a familial nod that would keep the younger Kennedy content without consequence. Yet, they were profoundly mistaken. Robert F. Kennedy, stepping into his role with a zeal unmatched, embarked on a crusade against organized crime, with his first act striking at the heart of the Mafia's web. The target was Carlos Marcello, a titan of the criminal underworld, who had first felt the icy threat of deportation in 1951 amidst the Kefauver hearings. Senators, with a chilling resolver, had vowed to expel him from American soil. Despite the decade that passed, Marcello remained, a fact that underscored the audacity of his presence. However, under the steely gaze of Robert F. Kennedy, the promise of retribution was no longer a distant threat, but an imminent storm, heralding a war between the state and the shadowy realms of organized crime. During John F. Kennedy's presidency, a time marked by high stakes and shadowy alliances, he delivered a speech that, although not explicitly naming its targets, hinted at the presence of powerful clandestine forces within American society. This speech, famous for its veiled references, came at a time when Kennedy was simultaneously confronting Fidel Castro's regime, organized crime networks, and tumult within labor unions. Ironically, despite his public stance against these entities, Kennedy's personal and political life was deeply intertwined with the very elements he opposed. Kennedy's connections to organized crime were complex and controversial. He maintained associations with notable figures such as Frank Sinatra, who had ties to the Mafia, and engaged in activities aimed at reclaiming Cuba from Castro's grip. These efforts included covert operations and alliances that would later come to light, revealing a web of intrigue involving the Kennedy administration, the Mafia, and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. One striking instance of this intricate relationship involved Robert F. Kennedy, the president's brother and attorney general, who had gathered compelling evidence against Sam Giancana, a notorious Mafia leader. As Robert prepared to take legal action against Giancana, he was astounded to learn from the CIA that they were collaborating with Giancana on plans to overthrow Castro. This revelation underscored the complex, sometimes contradictory nature of American political and intelligence strategies during the Cold War era. The entanglements extended beyond the Kennedys and Giancana. J. Edgar Hoover, the formidable head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, was simultaneously uncovering the extensive criminal activities of organized crime, while also being aware of the Kennedys' efforts to use and protect informants within these networks. Hoover's knowledge of these dynamics and his efforts to protect informants from harm highlighted the precarious balance of power and secrecy that defined this period. Amidst this backdrop of covert operations and moral ambiguities, Kennedy's speech about secret societies resonated as a cryptic warning about the unseen forces shaping American life and policy. While he did not directly mention Eisenhower's caution against the military-industrial complex, Kennedy alluded to a broader constellation of power, including what Eisenhower had identified as the industrial-military-congressional complex. This nuanced critique reflected a deep concern about the undue influence of organized interests on American democracy and the challenges of curbing such power. John F. Kennedy's speech on secret societies, delivered on April 27, 1961, to the American Newspaper Publishers Association, stands as a profound and complex address that can be interpreted through various lenses, including the context of his administration's struggles with organized crime and the Mafia. The speech is often remembered for its emphasis on transparency, freedom of the press, and the dangers of secrecy in a democratic society. When linking specific phrases and themes from this speech to the Mafia, one can draw parallels to the operations and the influence of organized crime in America during Kennedy's time. One part of this speech that strikes me is when Kennedy mentions the word secrecy and the way he highlights such threats to America's democracy. Here is what he said in full.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are as a people inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment.
Kennedy's condemnation of secrecy and secret societies resonates with the secretive nature of the Mafia. Organized crime families operate in the shadows, bound by secret oaths and proceedings, much like the secret societies Kennedy alluded to. The very structure of the Mafia, with its code of omerta, a vow of silence, reflects the kind of secrecy Kennedy found repugnant. By highlighting the dangers of such secrecy, Kennedy indirectly critiqued the clandestine operations of the Mafia, which thrived on concealment from law enforcement and the public eye. Another part would be,
it requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions, by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations.
When Kennedy spoke of the need for a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions, this could be interpreted as a subtle nod to the necessity of evolving strategies in the fight against organized crime. Traditional law enforcement methods were often ineffective against the well-entrenched Mafia networks. Kennedy's administration, particularly through his brother Robert F. Kennedy's role as Attorney General, signaled a shift towards more aggressive and innovative approaches to dismantle the power structures of organized crime families. This included wiretaps, undercover operations, and leveraging the RICO Act to prosecute high-ranking mob members. Kennedy's reference to a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy, relying on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, eerily mirrors the operational methods of the Mafia. Organized crime sought to infiltrate legitimate businesses, labor unions, and even political circles to extend its control. The Mafia's influence was not always overt. Instead, it relied on subversion, intimidation, and corruption to maintain and expand its power. Kennedy's broader concern about such tactics undermining democracy and freedom could easily apply to the corrosive effect the Mafia had on American society.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match.
Kennedy, it seems, speaks with unbridled candor about the modus operandi of the Mafia. He paints a vivid picture of an organization so entrenched in power that it orchestrates its affairs with absolute impunity. In his narrative, the Mafia emerges as a shadowy behemoth that wields control over journalists and press outlets, ensuring an ironclad grip on the flow of information. The essence of its dark operations remains shrouded in secrecy. Blunders are swiftly entombed in silence, never to scandalize the headlines. Dissent within its ranks is met with a grim fate. Those who dare to deviate from their omerta or break the sacred code of silence are mercilessly erased, their existence relegated to mere footnotes, forever branded as traitors. In Kennedy's portrayal, the Mafia's adversaries find themselves ensnared in a web of intimidation. Their courageous stands against the syndicate dismissed, and their reputations tarnished, relegated to the ignominious status of dirty little rats. When the Mafia lavishes its ill-gotten gains, no eyebrow is raised, no inquiry launched. Rumors that could tarnish its name are smothered before they can take flight. Thanks to a formidable arsenal of legal threats poised against detractors, safeguarding its clandestine affairs from prying eyes. Kennedy invokes the imagery of a Cold War waged not between nations, but within the underbelly of society, a conflict marked by a discipline so stringent, no democracy could ever dream or desire to emulate it. This is an entity that has not only subjugated America, but has cast its shadow over the Bahamas, South America, and even the arid expanses of Nevada. The Mafia's ambition knows no bounds, for it has set its sights beyond, aiming to ensnare Europe, South America, the Bahamas, and Brazil in its web of influence.
Nevertheless, every democracy recognizes the necessary restraints of national security, and the question remains whether those restraints need to be more strictly observed if we are to oppose this kind of attack as well as outright invasion.
Kennedy's speech underscored the critical role of the press in maintaining a transparent and informed society. His call for the media to scrutinize and question expenditures, rumors, and secrets is particularly relevant to the fight against organized crime. The media's role in exposing the activities of the Mafia, from high-profile cases to the everyday impact on communities, is crucial in mobilizing public opinion and political will to address the threat posed by organized crime. This speech suggests multiple interpretations, hinting not only at the rise of communism and unrest in South America, including Cuba, but also at the threat posed by secret societies in America. It reflects a period when speeches by figures like Robert Kennedy were seen as warnings to the Mafia, signaling a determined crackdown on organized crime. The deportation of Carlos Marcello serves as a pivotal moment in this narrative, marking the beginning of a more aggressive stance against the Mafia. However, this action would have unintended consequences for the Kennedys, as Marcello, embodying the quintessential mafioso, vowed revenge. Marcello's response was not immediate violence, but an attempt at peace through outreach to influential figures like Trafficante and other Mafia families. He hoped to persuade them to intercede with the Kennedys on his behalf. Yet these efforts were in vain, as the Kennedys did not heed the warnings. As long as John F. Kennedy remained in office, Marcello metaphorically tightened the noose around his neck, reluctant to harm JFK but feeling compelled to act against Robert Kennedy to diminish his power. Robert Kennedy's aggressive targeting of the Mafia was seen by some as a personal vendetta, possibly to spite political figures like Vice President Johnson, who had connections to Marcello. This discovery spurred Robert Kennedy to intensify his campaign against organized crime, particularly in Texas and Louisiana, regions historically overlooked by efforts to combat the Mafia. New York had faced its own battles with organized crime, with notable figures such as Luciano and Joe Adonis deported, and others like Vito Genovese and Frank Costello imprisoned. Chicago, too, had seen high-profile convictions, including Al Capone for tax evasion and Paul Ricca over a studio scandal. However, the South, and specifically the Louisiana Mafia and other crime groups active since the 1890s, had largely been ignored until Robert Kennedy focused his attention on them. By November 1963, rumors and stories were circulating that powerful entities wanted President Kennedy removed. This atmosphere of conspiracy and impending doom underscores the fraught relationship between the Kennedys and organized crime, a saga of power struggles, vengeance, and the tragic consequences of political and personal vendettas. In October 1963, a significant turn in American history took place when Joe Valachi, who had first come forward in 1962, was thrust into the spotlight. His testimony, broadcasted to the nation, unveiled the existence of a powerful criminal organization he called La Cosa Nostra, or This Thing of Ours. The American public was captivated by the revelations of this secretive society, also known as the Mafia. Valachi's disclosures came at a pivotal time, just weeks before the Kennedy administration would come to an abrupt end. He laid bare the Mafia's inner workings, naming key figures across the United States, including the heads of New York's 5 families and other mob leaders like Carlos Marcello, the reputed boss of New Orleans. Valachi warned that entering Marcello's territory without permission was akin to inviting death. This period marked a crucial point for organized crime in America. In New York, the Mafia faced a new reality, post-Kennedy, adapting to survive and evolve. The Chicago outfit, heavily targeted by the Kennedy administration, took significant hits. Key figures like Sam Giancana faced legal troubles, with Giancana's imprisonment in 1965 symbolizing the challenges faced by the mob. Yet the organization learned to navigate the heightened scrutiny from the press and government, demonstrating resilience amidst adversity. The Kennedy administration's aggressive stance against organized crime also put the spotlight on the Southern Mafia, previously less scrutinized. This led to efforts to protect their extensive criminal enterprises, especially in gambling and corruption, hinting at a willingness to ensure their interests were safeguarded at all costs. Valachi's 1963 testimony didn't just expose the Mafia, it shook the very foundations of their operations, signaling a moment of reckoning for organized crime in America. Coming into November 1963, it was a time of tension, change, and adaptation for those in the underworld, forever altering the landscape of American organized crime. Fast forward a couple of weeks to November 20th, 1963. We find ourselves in the simmering heat of Louisiana. A narrative unfolds, deeply entwined with the shadows of history and the whispers of secrets long kept. At the heart of this tale stands Mr. Francis Louis Fruge, a man whose life threaded through the fabric of law enforcement as a dedicated lieutenant with the Louisiana State Police from 1947 to 1967. Upon retirement, his past encounters would weave a compelling story, shadowed by the tragic event that shook America, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Our story begins on a seemingly ordinary day in November 1963, when Fruge's path crossed with that of Rose Cheramie, a mysterious figure with connections that hinted at dark conspiracies. Struck by a vehicle in front of the Silver Slipper Lounge and brought to the emergency ward of Musa Memorial Hospital, Cheramie's encounter with Fruge would unravel threads, leading to intricate plots and whispers of assassination. As Fruge recounted his experiences to investigator Robert Burris, the layers of this narrative unfolded. Cheramie, treated initially as a possible mental patient and later as an informant, revealed a chilling forewarning of President Kennedy's fate in Dallas, hinting at her involvement with sinister figures planning the unthinkable. Fruge's investigations would not stop at Cheramie's startling revelations. His involvement with U.S. Customs and his assistance to New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison's investigator, Andy Ciambra, in the Clinton-Jackson area, painted a broader picture of a time rife with political turbulence and clandestine operations. Throughout these years, Fruge's assignments brought him face-to-face with the underbelly of society and the covert dealings that shaped history's course. From the Sovereignty Commission in Baton Rouge to the dark corners of Eunice, Louisiana, where he first encountered Cheramie, Fruge navigated through a maze of secrets and lies. Cheramie's predictions of Kennedy's assassination, her claims of being part of a plot involving Cubans or Italians, and her connection to narcotics and underworld figures pulled Fruge deeper into a vortex of investigations that spanned states and blurred the lines between criminal underworlds and political machinations. The narrative thickens as Fruge's investigations intersect with the assassination's aftermath, revealing a complex web of connections involving key figures like Sergio Arcacha Smith and the mysterious dealings at the Silver Slipper Lounge. The untimely deaths, the shadowy figures lurking in the background, and the unanswered questions surrounding Cheramie's own tragic fate add layers of intrigue to this tale. As Fruge's story unfolds through the eyes of investigator Burras, we are transported to a time where truth and fiction blur, where the fate of a nation hung in the balance, and where the lives of individuals like Fruge and Cheramie became forever entwined with the darkest moments of American history. This is not just a recounting of events, but a narrative woven from the threads of hidden truths, personal encounters, and the relentless pursuit of justice in the face of overwhelming mystery. Investigator Robert Burras met with Mr. Fruge at the specified time and date. Mr. Fruge revealed he is currently self-employed, but had served as a lieutenant with the Louisiana State Police from 1947 to 1967, retiring after 20 years of service. He recounted his involvement in 1963 with Rose Cheramie in Eunice, Louisiana, initially treating her as a potential mental patient before working with her as an informant alongside the U.S. Customs in Houston, Texas, from November 20th to November 27th, 1963. Between 1965 and 1967, Mr. Fruge assisted Andy Ciambra, an investigator for New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, in the Clinton-Jackson area of Louisiana. During the same period, he was also assigned to the Louisiana Sovereignty Commission in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Mr. Fruge detailed a significant incident on Wednesday, November 20th, 1963, around 10 p.m. He was summoned to the Musa Memorial Hospital's emergency ward in Eunice, Louisiana, by Mrs. Louise Guillory, regarding a patient, Rose Cheramie, who had been hit by a car on Highway 190 near the Silver Slipper Lounge. Despite only suffering minor abrasions, Cheramie was brought to the hospital by Mr. Frank Odom, a known acquaintance of Mr. Fruge and a long-time local resident. Mrs. Guillory, suspecting Cheramie was under the influence of drugs, reached out to Lieutenant Fruge, given her condition and unable to release her. Lieutenant Fruge decided to place Cheramie in the local jail for her safety until she could sober up. Not long after, he received a call from the jail about Cheramie's disruptive behavior, leading to her transfer to the East Louisiana State Hospital for a thorough examination. This decision was made following the advice of Dr. Rodney Derouin, who sedated Cheramie at the jail. The transportation, with Cheramie in a straitjacket, took approximately 2 hours, during which she remained calm, questioning her detention and destination. Mr. Fruge explained that this protocol was standard for individuals exhibiting severe drug withdrawal symptoms, ensuring they received the necessary medical attention until they were stable enough for release. During a trip from Eunice to Jackson, Rose Cheramie shared that she was merely passing through town, journeying from Miami to Dallas and Houston. She ominously mentioned, "We're going to kill President Kennedy when he comes to Dallas in a few days." Despite revealing her travels with a couple of men, Lieutenant Fruge initially did not take her assertions seriously attributing them to her condition. Subsequently, he admitted her to a Jackson facility around 3 a.m. on Thursday, November 21, 1963. Although she remained calm, precautions were taken by placing her in a patient sack for her protection. The gravity of her statements hit home on Friday, November 22, 1963, when Lieutenant Frugier learned of President Kennedy's assassination in Dallas while at his residence. Following the incident, he attempted to follow up with Cheramie, who was agitated once more, making it difficult for a productive conversation. He requested the hospital staff to inform him once she had calmed down, which happened by Monday, November 25th. During their conversation, Cheramie detailed her journey from Miami with two men she described as either Cubans or Italians. She elaborated on a plan to kill Kennedy in Dallas before heading to Houston, where she was to collect 10 kilos of heroin from a seaman in Galveston. Her elaborate plan also included picking up payment for the drugs from someone holding her baby, thereafter transporting the heroin to Mexico. However, Lieutenant Frugier could not recall specific details she provided, such as the seaman's name, the ship, or the alias she used at the hotel, suggesting that U.S. Customs might hold this information. Lieutenant Frug shared Cheramie's alarming narrative with Colonel Morgan of the State Police, who in turn informed Colonel Burbank, the head of the State Police. They decided to investigate further and contacted Nathan Durham, Chief Customs Agent in Port Arthur, Texas, providing him with the seaman's name and ship. Durham confirmed the existence of the ship and the seaman on its roster within 30 minutes. Colonel Morgan relayed this information to Will Fritz of the Dallas Police Department, highlighting the verified elements of Cheramie's story related to the assassination plot and the heroin. Despite this, when Morgan reached out to federal agents, he was told they were not interested at that moment. Determined to pursue the lead, Lieutenant Fruge, Colonel Morgan, Rose Cheramie, and a state police pilot flew to Houston on Tuesday in the LASP plane to coordinate with customs officials in an attempt to intercept the heroin shipment. Their investigation confirmed the reservation at the Rice Hotel, as Cheramie had described. They also looked into the man who supposedly had the money and her baby, discovering he was a suspected underworld narcotics dealer heavily connected back to the New Orleans and Dallas Mafia. The unfolding investigation into both the assassination plot and the narcotics operation indicated a deepening mystery, leading to further inquiries and actions in an effort to unravel the intertwined allegations Cheramie had brought to light. While on their flight to Texas, one of the passengers, engrossed in the day's newspaper, brought up an intriguing headline claiming there was no connection between Oswald and Ruby. This elicited a laugh from Rose Cheramie, who was also on board. With a hint of insider knowledge, she dismissed the headline, revealing that Oswald and Ruby were intimately close during her time as a stripper for Ruby. Despite her detailed account, the specific name of the establishment where she performed eluded Fruge. It was neither the Carousel nor anything straightforward, but something suggestive like the pink or red door. This piece of information, though intriguing, was shelved away at the moment, with no immediate investigation pursued. The backstory of Cheramie became more complex when she was discovered along a highway in Eunice, Louisiana, with her possessions packed into 2 cardboard boxes, one of which contained baby clothes and shoes. This discovery led Frug to speculate about her personal life, though no further exploration into the boxes was made. In a twist of fate, an agent named Bob Woody assumed the role of her protector or sugar daddy as they checked into the Rice Hotel. Concurrently, a covert operation was losing its grip as a seaman slipped surveillance in Galveston, heading towards Houston and inadvertently derailing a narcotics operation. Despite the unfolding events, contact with Cheramie at the Hotel faltered, and the operation was deemed a failure. Ultimately, Fruge and his team, having received no directive to engage with Cheramie from higher authorities, decided to return to Baton Rouge, leaving Cheramie to her own devices in Houston. This incident gradually faded from Fruge's memory. However, the story took a new turn in the mid-60s, when Jim Garrison's investigation into the Kennedy assassination rekindled interest in the Cheramie case. Loaned to Garrison by the state police, Lieutenant Fruge contributed to the investigation, interviewing key figures in Jackson and Clinton, Louisiana. Among them was Mac Manuel, the manager of the Silver Slipper Lounge, who vividly recalled Cheramie's visit accompanied by 2 men, with a third joining later. Through photo identification, the men were recognized as Sergio Arcacha Smith and a possibly named Asanto, along with John Paul Jeanette, whose later interaction with Asanto became a point of interest, especially given Jeanette's subsequent death in 1978. Sergio Arcacha Smith stood as a beacon, drawing together the far-right exiles incensed by the Kennedy administration. These exiles found an unlikely nexus with John Martino, a figure of considerable repute within the Santo Traficante crime family, weaving a web of connections that stretched into the darkest corners of power and influence. At the heart of this clandestine network pulsed the formidable presence of Carlos Marcello, a mob titan whose wealth and ambition knew no bounds. Marcello, orchestrating from the shadows, bankrolled a complex operation aimed at uniting those who harbored a venomous disdain for Kennedy, mirroring his own deep-seated enmity. Amidst this intricate tableau of alliances and animosities, a secondary thread entangled Sergio with Carlos José Bronguier, a name forever linked with Guy Bannister, David Ferry, Carlos Marcello, and, most infamously, Lee Harvey Oswald. It was Bronguier who clashed with Oswald in New Orleans, a confrontation immortalized on film as Oswald distributed leaflets. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly spontaneous altercation lay a deeper, more calculated narrative. Bronguier, it emerged, had sought to enlist Oswald's services, laying the groundwork for a relationship that predated their public confrontation. This encounter was not the inception of their connection, but a calculated display, a chapter in a saga that intertwined Oswald with a cabal of New Orleans power brokers, Cuban exiles, and figures of the underworld, all orbiting the magnetic field of Carlos Marcello. Even Jack Ruby, the man who would ultimately silence Oswald, shared ties with this shadowy congregation, united by a common legal defender in Dean Andrews. Entering 1967, Carlos Marcello had become one of America's most notorious mobsters, particularly after the infamous meeting at the La Stella restaurant. It was this event that prompted Garrison to begin his investigation, and this renewed interest into Cheramie's claims and her connections provided a complex weave of narratives that continued to unfold, revealing layers of intrigue and unanswered questions in a case that was far from closed. Mac Manuel was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, on April 17, 1927. Mac Manuel, Jeanette stated, may have had connections with Asanto. Mac Manuel reported to Fruge that Asanto, or someone with a similar name, regularly transported girls from Miami to the Silver Slipper, where they would work temporarily before returning home. This individual's involvement should be noted in some of Garrison's investigative reports. Tragically, Mac Manuel met his end through gunfire in Ville Platte, Louisiana, between 1974 and 1975. In 1966, Fruge was tasked with locating Rose Cheramie. He discovered she was born in Houston, Texas, and met her demise in a small Texas town in 1965, struck by a vehicle while either walking or hitchhiking along a highway. The incident left her with a fatal skull fracture. This incident, bearing a stark resemblance to the manner in which she first entered Fruge's investigation, cloaked her demise in a veil of irony and sorrow. Jim Garrison, seeking further investigation, requested the exhumation of her body. However, local authorities resisted, denying the request amidst a lack of cooperation. Fruge found it peculiar that an accident of such nature resulted in only a skull fracture, with no other bones broken. Efforts to trace the driver responsible led to dead ends, with no records found beyond a police report and state vehicle registration data. Though the driver's whereabouts might have been uncovered later, Fruge had no subsequent information. Fruge briefly mentioned Dr. Silva, a Cuban native who worked at the East Louisiana State Hospital in 1963. His mention of Dr. Silva was not to imply any illicit activities, but rather to note his Cuban origins. Lastly, Fruge inquired about the discovery of sewer system diagrams of Dealey Plaza in Arcacha Smith's Texas apartment, suggesting that Captain Will Fritz might have alluded to this detail, though he was uncertain. Fruge's recollections offer a glimpse into a series of intertwined investigations, leaving an air of mystery and unanswered questions, indicating that there might be more to the story yet to unfold. He was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, on April 17, 1927. This man, Jeanette, may have had connections with Asanto. Mac Manuel reported to Fruge that Asanto, or someone with a similar name, regularly transported girls from Miami to the Silver Slipper, where they would work temporarily before returning home. This individual's involvement should be noted in some of Garrison's investigative reports. Tragically, Mac Manuel met his end through gunfire in Villa Plata, Louisiana, between 1974 and 1975. In 1966, Fruge was tasked with locating Rose Cheramie. He discovered she was born in Houston, Texas, and met her demise in a small Texas town in 1965, struck by a vehicle while either walking or hitchhiking along a highway. The incident left her with a fatal skull fracture. Jim Garrison, seeking further investigation, requested the exhumation of her body. However, local authorities resisted, denying the request amidst a lack of cooperation. Fruge found it peculiar that an accident of such nature resulted in only a skull fracture with no other bones broken. Efforts to trace the driver responsible led to dead ends, with no records found beyond a police report and state vehicle registration data. Though the driver's whereabouts might have been uncovered later, Fruge had no subsequent information. Fruge briefly mentioned Dr. Silva, a Cuban native who worked at the East Louisiana State Hospital in 1963. His mention of Dr. Silva was not to imply any illicit activities, but rather to note his Cuban origins. Lastly, Fruge inquired about the discovery of sewer system diagrams of Dealey Plaza in Arcacha Smith's Texas apartment, suggesting that Captain Will Fritz might have alluded to this detail, though he was uncertain. Fruge's recollections offer a glimpse into a series of intertwined investigations, leaving an air of mystery and unanswered questions, indicating that there might be more to the story yet to unfold. Mr. Fruge revealed he had a Xerox copy of a letter from Margaret Martins, mother of Leighton Martins, addressed to the late Father Toops. This letter contained Mrs. Martin's recounting of overhearing discussions about assassinating President Kennedy, involving David Ferry, Clay Shaw, and Guy Bannister in 1963. Despite these alarming claims, she asserted her son Leighton had no part in such conversations. The letter was penned after New Orleans District Attorney Garrison had summoned her son before the grand jury, a time during which Mrs. Martins was either romantically involved or closely acquainted with David Ferry. The dates selected revealed that Guy Bannister, David Ferry, and Clay Shaw were allegedly connected. Yet Clay Shaw managed to provide alibis, placing him in different parts of Louisiana and later in various other locations, effectively countering the accusations. Despite Shaw's successful alibis, suspicion shifted towards another individual who fit the profile of a wealthy, influential businessman, deeply linked to both David Ferry and Guy Bannister, Carlos Marcello. It was very well known Marcello employed Ferry and Bannister to assist him in a critical legal battle against the Immigration and Justice Department. Notably, this court appearance coincided with the day of President Kennedy's assassination, implicating their potential involvement during a pivotal historical event. Mr. Fruge also delved into the background of Mrs. Martins, noting her involuntary commitments to psychiatric facilities, once to Charity Hospital, New Orleans, then to a facility in Mandeville, Louisiana, on August 16, 1963, and again to Charity Hospital on November 30th, 1966, both times by David Ferry and her son, Leighton. Following conversations with her psychiatrist who confirmed Mrs. Martins was not insane, Mr. Frouge emphasized the timing of her claims. The August 1963 commitment coincided with Lee Harvey Oswald's distribution of leaflets in New Orleans, and the 1966 date aligned with burgeoning rumors of the grand jury's impending investigations in New Orleans. Adding another layer to the intricate narrative, Mr. Frouge recounted a tale from Andy Dunn of Clinton, Louisiana. Dunn had observed a suspicious vehicle near a voter registration office, with 3 men inside at the same time Oswald was present. The identity of one man remains a mystery. Dunn's subsequent death in jail, purportedly by suicide, adds a shadow of doubt and tragedy to his account. Further, Mr. Frouge touched upon his interactions with notable figures such as Henry Sibley of Denham Springs or Hammond, Louisiana, who chaired the State Sovereignty Commission, and retired Major Russell Willey of the Louisiana State Police. Despite Sibley's significant position, Frouge does not recall any direct dealings with Guy Bannister's files at the Commission, leaving open the possibility that important documents could have been overlooked or unknown to him. As Mr. Frouge's recollections unfold, it becomes evident that the tangled web of connections, allegations, and mysterious circumstances surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy extends far into the heart of Louisiana, hinting at a broader yet obscured narrative which will be explored in my Carlos Marcello documentary. Rose Cheramie made history when she eerily predicted the assassination of President Kennedy 2 days before it occurred on November 22, 1963. Her forewarning was not isolated. Following the assassination, others came forward with their own allegations. Jose Aleman, a sharp businessman from Miami, visited another astute Florida businessman, Santo Traficante Jr. They discussed the potential of gaining a Teamster pension loan for one of Aleman's ventures. However, Traficante expressed concerns about the feasibility of obtaining a loan from Jimmy Hoffa. Given the FBI's scrutiny over Hoffa's loans for allegations of fraud and criminal assistance, coupled with the political climate bolstered by John F. Kennedy's growing popularity, securing a loan seemed daunting. During their conversation, Traficante ominously predicted that if Kennedy ever visited Dallas, he would be targeted for assassination. Aleman, at the time, did not dwell much on this remark. Yet the subsequent assassination of Kennedy in Dallas profoundly unsettled him, as Traficante's premonition came to pass. Years later, in the late 70s, Aleman shared Traficante's prediction with journalists and others, which led to him being summoned to testify. Under this new spotlight, Aleman altered his account, suggesting Traficante had metaphorically spoken of Kennedy being hit by a wave of votes, not an actual assassination. Nonetheless, Aleman had previously shared the more literal interpretation of a hit planned by the Southern Mafia against Kennedy in Dallas throughout the 60s and early 70s. This growing chorus of voices alarmed Carlos Marcello, a key figure in organized crime, who understood the gravity of the situation. Marcello, alongside other crime families such as the Genovese and Gambino, and implicating the Colombo family, played a significant role in the events leading up to Kennedy's death. They had all been given unique roles by Marcello, a strategy designed to keep their identities secret unless they decided to speak out. John Martino, a captain in the Santo Traficante crime family, was deeply entrenched in the criminal underworld, yet maintained connections with the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. He was aware of Kennedy's intentions towards Cuba, including a potential deal with Castro's second-in-command, aimed at removing Castro from power. This plan intended to establish a friendlier relationship with Cuba, aligning with Kennedy's promises to the American people. However, for Cuban exiles and their allies in organized crime, this was unacceptable. Their goal was to eradicate communism from Cuba entirely, and Kennedy's reluctance to commit to this led them to conclude that he should be removed from power with Vice President Johnson, an angry Texan, seen as a preferable alternative. Marcello's motivation extended beyond geopolitics. He was driven by a personal vendetta. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, the president's brother, was relentlessly pursuing organized crime, particularly Marcello. The assassination of JFK therefore served multiple objectives. It silenced a potential threat to their operations and removed the driving force behind the crackdown on the Mafia. In our series on history and organized crime, we are exploring the intricate web of bosses, political corruption, and the shadowy interactions between intelligence agencies and the underworld. At the heart of our journey is the groundbreaking work of Lucky Luciano, whose strategies laid the groundwork for modern organized crime. His story provides a deep dive into both political and police corruption, revealing how these elements allowed the Mafia to wield significant power in New York. Through the lens of Frank Costello's life, we uncover the depths of political corruption, showing how gambling became a tool for buying political influence and integrating the Mafia into elite circles. A pivotal figure in our narrative is Meyer Lansky, whose role underscores the vital contributions of the Jewish Mafia to the rise of the Italian-American Mafia. The Jewish Mafia's expertise in finance and industry, combined with their critical support during Prohibition, gambling and union movements, were key to the Mafia's expansion. Our upcoming documentary on Lansky will explore the intersection of the banking sector with the worlds of organized crime and entertainment. Finally, we turn to Carlo Gambino, who represents a new era in organized crime. Although contemporaneous with Luciano, Gambino's reign was marked by internal conflicts and external battles with both the American government and international figures like Castro. His leadership showcases the evolving challenges and dynamics within the Mafia and its interactions with the establishment. After exploring the complex dynamics of New York's organized crime scene, we will shift our focus to the Chicago outfit, arguably the most formidable Mafia syndicate in American history. Its unmatched power and influence were evident as its leaders managed to avoid capture, living out their days as wealthy, untouchable figures at the helm of an empire that eclipsed any other. In the nation's history of organized crime, the Chicago outfit's reach extended far beyond its home city, claiming the largest territorial control in the Mafia world. Our examination delves into the outfit's intricate involvement in political corruption and its bold ventures beyond Illinois, including the control over Hollywood and significant inroads into California. Central to our story are key figures like Paul Ricca, Tony Accardo, Jake Guzik, Al Capone, Joseph Aiuppa, Sam Giancana, Frank Nitti, Johnny Roselli, Murray Humphreys, and Anthony Spilotro, among others. Each played a pivotal role in the outfit's operations, showcasing the depth of its power and the caliber of its membership. What set the Chicago outfit apart was not just its expansive empire, but the unique dynamics within its ranks. Despite the hierarchy of bosses, captains, and made men, there was a palpable sense of equality, honor, and respect that permeated their interactions. This unity and mutual respect blurred the lines of their formal titles, creating a formidable bond that was key to their success and longevity. Following our exploration of the Chicago outfit's pivotal role in political corruption and its significant influence, which even led Joseph Kennedy to seek their assistance for the 1960 election, our journey takes us south to Florida. Here, we focus on Santo Traficante Jr. and his crime family. Despite being smaller in size, the Traficante family played a crucial role in the nexus of Cuba, Havana, and Castro's rise, intertwining with the Central Intelligence Agency and navigating the complex social issues of racism and anti-Semitism in the South. After delving into the Traficante family's operations and influence, we shift our attention to the final major figure in our series, Carlos Marcello. Marcello's story encapsulates the reasons behind the Mafia's downfall, highlighting his significant power across various territories. His actions, particularly those rumored to involve the Kennedy assassination, shifted the battle with law enforcement from public disputes to a covert war marked by espionage and high-profile assassinations during the 60s. Despite J. Edgar Hoover's initial reluctance to acknowledge the mafia threat, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy spurred a new generation of FBI agents, known as the Bobby Boys, into action. From 1966 to 1969, these agents focused on exposing the mafia's political corruption through media stories. The 70s saw a shift towards direct legal action against the mafia, culminating in the implementation of the RICO Act. This legislation, complicated in its inception, was made accessible to law enforcement through the efforts of Professor Robert Blakey, who played a pivotal role in the HSCA hearings. Without the Kennedy administration's influence and the legal framework, it inspired the concerted effort to dismantle the mafia through the RICO Act might never have occurred. Marcello's reign and eventual downfall illustrate a key theme: the mafia's overreach and the inevitable consequences of its vast empire. This narrative brings us to the heart of our series, examining the rise and fall of organized crime in America through its most influential figures.